Hi, I'm Tom Casababian. This is a clean air Corvair. It's a propane powered Corvair and it's the world's fastest Corvair. Now a lot of people when they see this car or when they hear about it, they think, wow, that must have been really something because Corvairs are unsafe, aren't they? You must have really had to make a lot of modifications to the chassis and the suspension to make the car safe. Well, this car went 176 miles an hour. The two-way average, in fact, was 173 miles an hour. I don't remember making any modifications to the chassis. What we can do, we'll take a look underneath the car and see, because it was 45 years ago, so I may have forgotten. Let's take a look. Okay, here you are in the front suspension and the front of the car. First of all, this little plastic strip here is a, what they call it, a chin spoiler. And it's a factory part. It was on, starting in 1966, all the Corvairs had this. It's just a little device to kind of keep some of the air from going underneath the car and push it around to the side instead. I've run Corvairs with and without this device. I guess it helps, but I didn't notice any difference when I didn't have it. But anyway, it's a standard part. It's not a modification. Under here we have, let's take a look and see. We've got the front cross member and the front suspension. This is the A-arms here. No modifications here. It's just the rusty old parts. This old shock absorber, I don't know where it came from. I think it was on the car when I got it. It looks like it might be Montgomery Ward or something like that. It's just a plain old shock absorber. Actually, the salt flats, you don't need shock absorbers because the salt flats are flat. There are no bumps. But anyway, we can look at the same thing on this side. There's nothing here that I can see that's been modified. A lot of the bushings are kind of cracked and the rubber is kind of deteriorated, but that's all standard stuff. This is the anti-roll bar or the stabilizer bar, and it's a standard part on the Corvair. There's nothing changed on that. All the parts are the original parts. Now the gas tank is missing because the car runs on propane. So there's a kind of an empty space here. We can go back here and look at the steering. It's all, just dirty old Corvair stuff. Nothing different or modified. So far, I don't see anything here that's been modified at the front suspension. So let's go to the back. Maybe there's something back there that's been modified. Okay, we're at the back now. This is the area where, of course, the engine is located. A lot of people think that there's something wrong with cars with the rear engine. Actually, rear engine cars are very safe because you have traction. And when you lose traction is when you have problems with stability. So with the engine back here, it makes the car nice and safe. The suspension, of course, is very important. So let's take a look. This is the standard Corvair suspension. This is the half shaft, the axle. And then this is the lower control arm, and it's all standard. Even the bushings are standard bushings. The trailing arm is standard. There's no changes there. Again, we got an old shock absorber on here. It looks like it's pretty old, but it's all looking very, very standard, very stock. I don't see any changes here. Well, there is one change. These tires are very big. They're almost as big as a truck tire. They're 28 inches in diameter. These are special tires made just for Bonneville, made by Firestone. These were made, actually I bought these tires in 1964, so they're almost 55 years old. But they're so big, they raised the car up off the ground to where it was unsafe. So I had to shorten the springs to get the car back down to the normal ride height, so I did that by shortening the spring. So these springs have been shortened. You can see it's kind of loose, it kind of rattles there, but it's jacked up like that. Hopefully, so far they've never fallen out, but they could, I guess. But anyway, the shorter springs brings the car back down to the normal ride height. So that is a modification. It doesn't affect the handling one way or the other. It just makes the car back down to the normal ride height. So that's the only thing that we changed on the suspension at all on the car. So far, I guess we can say that the chassis and the suspension on this Corvair are unmodified. So what does that mean? Well, let's talk about that some more. Okay, we've looked at the bottom of this car. We've checked the suspension at the front, the rear, and the chassis, and we didn't find any modifications, just the shorter springs that we used to get the car back down lower to the ground. So what we're saying here is that I could take any Corvair and put this engine and these tires on it, and it'll go just as fast as this one. There's nothing about the Corvair that makes it unsafe. It's inherently safe with just the way it's built, with the standard suspension. So what makes it different? What makes this car go 176 miles an hour? Well, it has a very special engine. So we'll take a look at that. This is a 1965 Corvair engine. It's been extensively modified. It's designed to run on propane gas, which is a whole different idea, but it works very well. And it has turbochargers, of course. The thing about turbochargers is that a lot of people are familiar with turbocharging these days, but in 1962, hardly anybody knew what a turbocharger was. It was the Chevy Corvair that introduced the first successful turbocharged engine to the automobile world in 1962. Now, Oldsmobile made an attempt also. In fact, they were a few months earlier in their introduction, and they introduced a Oldsmobile Cutlass with a turbocharged V8, but they had a lot of production problems, and they had a recall, and within a few months, the car was out of production. It was unsuccessful. Corvair was very successful in '62, and it went on all the way for 5 model years. They built thousands and thousands of these turbocharged Corvairs, and the Corvair introduced turbocharging to the automobile world. Now, this engine, of course, is heavily modified. It does use the standard Corvair engine, the crankshaft. Most of the parts are production Chevrolet Corvair. I have special pistons made by George Solly of Indianapolis fame. You have a camshaft made by Ed Iskandarian. It's a special camshaft that he made, and it all works very, very well. Now, the turbocharger, of course, is located, this particular turbocharger is located very much like the original Corvair engine had it. It's turbocharger is here in the Corvair engine. The carburetor will be mounted here. On this engine, this is the propane mixer, which is equivalent to a carburetor. And what I've done is add a second turbocharger on this side, which is complementary with the mixer on this side and then the actual turbocharger here. This turbocharger supplies the left side of the engine, and this turbocharger supplies the air-fuel mixture to the right side of the engine. It's like 2 3-cylinder engines connected to the same crankshaft. These turbochargers are standard 1965 Corvair turbochargers. Like I say, the camshaft is special. We have special pistons. The cylinder head work has been pretty extensive. Over here we have a small tank of water. This is a water injection system that my friend Gary Bailey designed back in 1964, 1965. And it uses a special modulator right here. This modulator uses Corvair distributor parts. It's called a pressure retard. We use those parts, and it has a modulator there. It's a diaphragm that controls the valve, and it lets out the water, and the water goes into these 2 nozzles, one on each turbocharger, sprays the water in there, and the water then acts as a inhibitor. It reduces the tendency to detonate through a chemical process. It's what they call an endothermic reaction. It absorbs some of the energy during the initial stages of combustion, and it reduces the likelihood of a pre-ignition or detonation. Now, some people think that the water cools the mixture. Well, it does, but that's not the process that controls detonation. It's the actual chemical breakdown of the water, the components in the water, which absorbs energy from the combustion process and that's how they control the detonation. So the water injection is an important part of the car. Okay, and then these are the pressure converters. These are the regulators that reduce the high pressure liquid to a low pressure vapor, and then the vapor then goes through these hoses here, one to this carburetor or this mixer and one over to the other mixer. Now the process of converting high pressure liquid propane to a low pressure vapor is like a CO2 fire extinguisher. It gets very, very cold. And so to keep these from freezing up, we have to circulate hot water through the backside of these pressure converters to keep them freezing up. Well, this is an air-cooled engine. Where do we get hot water? Well, I have to make it. So I have a water jacket around this exhaust pipe, and I circulate water. I use an electric pump, a marine pump out of the boat, and I circulate hot water through the converters and through this heat exchanger to keep things from freezing up. So everything on this engine comes from the 1960s, and it's all available for nothing new. There's nothing on here that's made modern. All the components on here are available in 1960s, or they're standard Corvair parts that I've modified or used in stock form. Now this engine displaces 2.9 liters. That's 176 cubic inches. It's a 6-cylinder, horizontally opposed. It's called a boxer engine because they're horizontally opposed. Now, this engine below 5,000 RPM will produce about 100 horsepower. There's just enough horsepower to get it going in first gear. But once it hits 5,000 RPM, the horsepower increases dramatically, all the way to 7,500 and probably more, but I would not, with stock connecting rods, it's kind of pushing it to go even above 7,000. But probably produces in excess of 450 horsepower to make the car go the speeds that it has been able to accomplish. Now this engine, of course, uses a lot of stock components. I may have mentioned this earlier. The crankshaft, the connecting rods, the cylinder heads are modified, but they're stock Corvair cylinder heads. There's nothing on here that's aftermarket. You can't go down to your speed shop in the late 70s and buy this kind of equipment for a Corvair. It just didn't exist. So we had to make our own, and this is the result. Of course, this is an oil cooler down here. I had to remove the stock oil cooler to make room for the second turbocharger. So basically, we're looking at a relatively stock Corvair engine producing 450 horsepower. Okay, we're behind the wheel now of the world's fastest Corvair, the Clean Air Corvair, looking at the instrument panel. So I thought I'd kind of show you what's going on here. In the center, of course, we have the very important boost gauge, which monitors the pressure coming out of the turbocharger. This one will read as high as 30 psi. On the right, we have the tachometer, and it's redlined at 7,500 RPM, and that's how high I had to go in third gear. And over here on the left is the cylinder head temperature gauge. It's an aircraft gauge. It's dual. Reads both cylinder heads, and it's in Celsius, which I have to convert to Fahrenheit. Now, at one point, I was reading well over 250 degrees Celsius to give you an idea of how hot this engine gets. Now, over here we have the auxiliary gauges. On the left is the exhaust back pressure. That's the pressure, or the back pressure that builds up on the exhaust side of the turbocharger. And I monitor that as well as the boost pressure. Now both those gauges are for the right-hand turbo. The big gauge in the middle of the dash is only for the left-hand turbo. And of course the oil pressure gauge. And then we have the switches to control the engine, the fuel and spark. And then down below we have pyrometers. These are high temperature sensors that monitor the temperature of the exhaust going into the turbine. And in this case, on this car, these gauges go to 1,600 degrees, 1,500 degrees, and I was at the peg, well over 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit going into the turbocharger. So this thing was running hot and strong. It's a it was an interesting situation that this car, well, on my return run, I had the cylinder head blew out on the left-hand side, number 2 cylinder. I was just entering the 3rd mile, and because we had an overheating condition on the initial run, apparently the engine was somewhat damaged, but it was running a lot cooler on this particular run, so I raised the boost from 20 to 25 pounds boost, and we were probably doing close to 180 miles an hour when all of a sudden, just as I entered the time mile, I felt the car slow down, and I looked at the boost gauge, the big one in the middle, and it was showing 0. Well, I'd lost something on the left-hand side of the engine. I didn't know what it was, but there was no boost on the left-hand side. So I looked over to the right-hand side, and it was showing 20 pounds, 25 pounds boost. So I thought, well, I got to finish this run. So I went ahead and opened the throttle wide open. The boost on the right-hand side went to 30 psi. Managed to get through the run with 30 pounds boost on the right-hand 3 cylinders. No boost on the left-hand 3 cylinders, and we averaged 171 miles an hour on 3 cylinders. That's 88 cubic inches. It was a good, strong run. The car was going straight. People ask me, how does the car handle at 175 miles an hour? Well, it handled just like this. You see the steering wheel is not moving, and I'm looking down at the gauges, and every once in a while I'd look up to see where I was on the course and then back down at the gauges, because I'm monitoring. I got to see what's going on, the temperature, the boost, and all that. And so the car is going straight. It's like a laser beam going across the salt, straight. Other cars, they're constantly correcting because the car is slipping around, the back end sliding, and so you're constantly making correct. Not with the Corvair. Corvair is inherently safe. It'll go 175 miles an hour or faster, and without any problem at all. In fact, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I've tested Corvairs at speeds up to and in excess of 175 miles an hour, and I haven't found an unsafe speed yet.